Hello, folks. Welcome to another episode of UI Mondays. Oh, I just realized, actually, I've still got my Dev by Design stuff up from this morning. Welcome to UI Mondays. It's UI Mondays now. I am here today with my guest, Jake Shelley. We're going to talk all about his experience. Actually, why am I introducing you? You should introduce you. You would be much better at introducing you than I would be.
Well, thank you. Yeah, no, personally say, thank you for having me on. We were just chatting about this. So, I do watch I am a VOD watcher. I watch the episodes. I really enjoy it. So thank you for having me on. My name is Jake. I'm a software engineer, currently at Spotify. Previously at a small startup, we just got acquired a few months ago. And yeah, I've been doing software engineering for, I've been officially a software engineer for like 3.5 years. Before that, as a product manager. But I've been coding pretty much the whole time. So it's something I really enjoy doing.
That's neat. I always love when we have people on that took maybe like a less traditional path to software engineering. So that's not what you went to school for, or it is and you dabbled in product management and came back?
So I actually did go to school. So I originally went as I was going to do finance. And then I quickly learned that was not for me.
That's very fair.
And I was very lucky that I had done a little bit of like programming. My brother is a CS guy, and so I knew a little bit about it. So I tried a few classes, like fell in love with it pretty quickly, and switched majors.
Awesome.
But coming out of college, I was so nervous. I took basically the first job that I got, which was product management at IBM. So that's where I started. So I spent about 3 years doing that, and then I managed to make the jump.
That's really cool, though. And I bet having that perspective as a product manager helped you a bunch in your engineering career.
And I agree with you that I think like multidisciplined, like engineers, I always love working with, anyone who has like multiple perspectives in any role, but I think especially engineers, partly because I think that designers make the best engineers. Maybe product managers like this. Like I think
biased,
you're a
but yeah.
Well, let me tell you, I think
go on.
Yeah. Well, I really do believe that, because I think that I think that being an engineer, like the best engineers are the ones who like have empathy for users and like understand. Like it's easy, I think, as an engineer to get sort of like lost in the code, like in the coding minds, just like never coming out. And so I think that, always having in the back of your head, like there's a real person who is going to have to like sort of deal with this, like use it. I think just like having that always makes you better, whether it's cleaner code or just like thinking from the user perspective. And I think designers sort of are the most exposed to users before they become engineers, which is why I think I think it's such an advantage.
Yeah. No, I absolutely agree. It really is all about that empathy. And it's so easy to get bogged down in the really question of frameworks and technologies and what are you using and all of those kinds of architecture type questions that are so important, but also are things that your end user will never, ever see or be aware
Never
of.
see it. They don't care what's going on. They have no idea. I always have to I still have to remind myself of that, even though I feel like I'm more aware of it than the average. I still am always like, oh, right. Like they don't care what this variable name is.
They have no idea. As long as it works, they have no idea.
Yeah. No, 100%.
But why don't you go ahead and tell us a little bit more? You mentioned briefly working at a startup that was acquired by Spotify, and that's kind of huge. Like that had to have been a big jump.
Yeah, it was pretty incredible. I keep telling myself it's fun. Like, when I left product management, I wanted to be an engineer. I wanted to be an engineer for like years, and I had a lot of trouble. I think a lot of people like, that first job as an engineer is so tough. And even having a CS background, I kept getting interviews for PM roles. I'd actually go and they'd call me and they'd say, hey, by the way, like we're not going to hire you as an engineer, but like we'll hire you as a product manager. I'd say, no, that's not really what I'm looking for. So
thanks, but
yeah. So it really is incredible. And it's really fun because, if you had told me like 3 years ago, like, oh yeah, like in 3 years, like you'll not just be an engineer, like you'll actually be at like a really cool company. It would have been incredible. And yeah, I'm like really, I mean, I'm still like buzzing from it, as you might be able to tell. Like it's still very exciting. But yeah, yeah, it really has been a big jump. I think just like in terms of like resources that we now have, in terms of like time horizon, we're not sort of looking at like, okay, what does the next like month look like for the company?
Right.
It's like, how do we sort of have this 12 month time horizon that we can now like look out onto and see like what works best. And we also, it's so fun as an engineer, especially for like UI Monday, like it is so fun seeing like the component library that like Spotify has, just being able to like
I
pick and
bet.
choose. It's so fun. I like, it's coming out of having been like one of the only front end people on the team. It's me and it was me and one other guy, one other very talented engineer. We were able to build a lot of cool stuff, but it's fun like seeing, when you have a whole team dedicated. I mean, I personally think Spotify is a very like beautiful app. And so it's fun being able to like now just like pull that stuff off of a shelf. it's very like I'm a little bit spoiled now, it feels like.
Yeah, I can see that. I'll say I've been a Spotify user for a long time. I love them. And they have such a cool and very distinct visual style. So I could see where it'd be really fun to kind of be set loose in that like play box of stuff to just like
yeah
get to,
no, it's really cool. It's also like kind of humbling. I mean, not that like, I mean, it's all very humbling, but like seeing, what these guys are capable of doing, like in like, so it's like, they're like, I keep telling, my old boss, the former CTO of my company, I'm like, these guys are like on another level. Like, I look at my components, I'm like, hide that. Like, these are perfect. It's like, yeah. So it's a lot of fun though. It's been a real treat to sort of see how, it works from the inside. Yeah, it's been great.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about what your team was like when you were at the startup and kind of how that worked and the way that you were kind of used to working as a front-end engineer in that space. I think we get a lot of questions about that kind of just to give a little context to that question. We tend to have folks that are really interested in that like startup life and what that looks like and kind of how that functions in the way other teams are working and structured. And you must have been doing something right if you got acquired.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny because, it's like it's definitely, I mean, it's so cliche, but like it is a complete roller coaster. Like it's like, there's moments when you're like, oh my God, like we are going to go public. We're going to be $1 billion company. And there's moments where like, I should probably like polish my resume. And like those moments are like months apart.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a roller coaster. I got lucky, that like the team, the CEO and the CTO, were really good people, obviously very smart, but also just like very, they really like cared a lot about the team, which I think was really important. Cause like being in a startup, I mean, I joined when we were 4 people and we were never bigger than like, 15, I think at our max. And so it's a really tight knit. And so it's really important that, like these guys they're great guys and like they have a lot of control over, your life. So,
yes.
and so it's important to have like a good relationship. And I think, that was really important for us, or for me, especially my mental health while I worked at this place. So yeah, I know it's just to say like, for anyone wondering, like it really is intense. But yeah, I mean, like I said, we were always a very small team. And being an engineer on a team of that size, you have a lot of autonomy, and ability to sort of shape the products. Like at a bigger company, I find, well, when I was a PM, I definitely saw this, and now coming to Spotify, I'm starting to see this as well. Like, it's much more like the scope of project is much clearer. It's much more defined. You have a lot more user research. Like, exactly, like you have like,
that is a huge
when you're working this, right, like
yes.
It's a pretty big difference. Yeah, like it's like an order of magnitude. And so it's really like when you have millions of users, you're able to sort of see like these macro trends, whereas at our level, at our scale, it really was like pick up the phone, call somebody and be like, hey, like, what do you think about our app today? Or like, how do you want to use it? And I think that we, coming from having a PM background, I definitely pushed us to do that a lot. I pushed like myself to try to take on that as much as I could.
Yeah.
Just like emailing users and saying like, hey, do you have like half an hour to chat? And getting on the phone with them. And that actually drove a lot of sort of product ideas, including like a few that ended up being, some that were not that successful, some that were ended up being fairly like big hits. But it definitely, there's like a lot of working at a startup that size as an engineer. It's like you're like an engineer, but you're also like a product manager. And then for us, we were also kind of designers. Like we had like a design system, which was just like, here are the colors, and like try not to do anything too crazy. Yeah. But yeah, it's just you know, it's a lot of autonomy, a lot of just like figuring out what the right thing is to build for yourself, by yourself, and like having the team trust that you have done your research and know like what the user really needs. So yeah, it's definitely fun, definitely a big challenge.
Again, probably a little bit of personal bias, but I'm interested to hear a little bit more about how you made design decisions and kind of what that culture was like. Because I think we also get a lot of folks who are in similar positions where they don't necessarily have access to a design team or design resources, and kind of struggle to make those choices without having a design skill set of their own.
So. Yeah, no, it's honestly like, it's definitely it's very tough. I think especially like I do not exactly have like a designer eye. Like I can never tell when pixels are not aligned. Like I'll look at something and say, this doesn't look right. I can't tell why. And then like have somebody like look at it and be like, well, like these two things are just like completely not aligned. I'm like, oh yeah. So yeah, it definitely was a challenge. Yeah, I mean, what we did, I think, that was smart, was we sort of looked around. Like none of us were like amazing designers. I think we all sort of were like, first of all, we were just very honest about that. No one was like, I'll be in charge of design because I'm good at it. I think what we did that was smart was to sort of cope with it, was we really focused on UX. Because I think that like, you know, I think a lot of design, I think when people say design, they like, a lot of time they think like, oh, you know, like how does it look on the page? But sort of like, that's only, you know, I'm sure as your audience know, like that's only half of it. You know, it's like, how does the user actually interact with like with the experience? Like the UX is equally, if not more important, especially in B2B SaaS, where it's like, you know, our enterprise users, it's not like, well, with Spotify, obviously it's like consumers who like use the app, but with enterprise users, you know, it's their job to use this software. So it's really just like, how few clicks can the user make to do what their job is, and then they can leave and go and spend time with their family, go get drinks. So yeah, so we really tried to cope with the lack of like design experience, with a real focus on UX, making sure that like looking at what you know, like looking at each experience, looking at each product and breaking down like, okay, like our end user is a publisher, and the end user is a publisher, like who works in marketing, like what exactly are they coming to this page to solve, and then figuring out how can we like shorten the path from them like logging in or opening the page to solving that problem as quickly as possible, and then sort of just working backwards from there. And I'm sure this all sounds like very obvious to like design people, but like, you know, for us as four engineers, this was like, okay, like got to get in that mindset.
No, I mean, you get an audience of engineers here for the most part. So.
Okay, yeah. Yeah. So it really, so it ended up being, oh, sorry, I was going to say, yeah. So it really, that's kind of how I felt like we coped with it, with the lack of engineering experience and or lack of design experience and lack of like design resources. Because also, you know, we didn't want to spend too much time on like the UI design, like UX, you know, at the end of the day, like especially early stages, you know, we were just constantly shipping to like, I think I came in, like we had like partial product market fit, but like we were continuing to push. And yeah, especially in those early days, just like making sure that you're shipping experiences that these users like, you know, they'll forgive you kind of, especially those early users will forgive the lack of polish. So we use that to our advantage. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah, like there's a couple of comments in the chat here. Finding as I refine my own design implementation that UI UX is as important as data or the content itself. Yep. And if you can make the end user a stakeholder, so to speak, you're profiting immediately, which is Yes. Go ahead. You look like you're gonna say something.
Yeah, I don't know if I can say it any better than that. Yeah, like that's exactly my experience. You know, we have a data product. Actually, I don't think I said what we actually did. So we were a
No, I should
podcast
have prompted
analytics.
you to introduce that.
No,
Sorry.
I'm like, oh, everybody knows about. We're Spotify. It's like, no, actually, yeah. So we were a podcast analytics company. We still are. We still like available. So so podcast analysts. We do podcast analytics and ad measurement. So you know, we have products. If you're running a podcast, we compile analytics across all the different providers, show it to you in sort of like a nice UI, a nice sort of consumable experience. And we also help podcasters measure measure like cross promo. So if you're guesting on a podcast, we can show how many downloads that drives. Yeah, that was a fun UI challenge. I can talk about that because we're basically in the middle of the market there. It was that took a while to figure out. But yeah, just to say, what Wilson said. Yeah, I mean, I think that most users don't want spreadsheets, and the users who do want spreadsheets are not like customers that I, as a front end engineer, need to worry about. We definitely did have people who were just like, just give me the data. Like, I don't want any fancy stuff. But especially consumers like podcasters who are getting, smaller numbers of downloads, they definitely, they wanted to be able to look at something and immediately take action. And so just showing them like, yeah, you have all this data, but really what you want to look at is like, here's how much retention you're getting throughout an episode. Like, oh, people dropped off here. And like, we highlight that for you and say like, oh, this is, so that's, making sure like making the data consumable is probably like the key.
That's interesting. I want to pick your brain on that a little bit because
Sure.
I've been kicking around and I haven't written it yet, but I'm halfway through a blog on data visualizations and kind of the best way to approach them and what engineers should know about making design decisions around data viz. And it sounds like that was a chunk of what y'all were tackling at Chartable.
Yeah.
Without a design team, which is impressive.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm happy to talk more about that. Yeah, I mean, I was lucky that I had worked. So in product, I had been doing data, like I was in like the IBM, like analytics, SKU. And so like I was BU. So I have always been like thinking about this stuff. Luckily, when I did have a giant design team of like really smart people at IBM, they were solving these problems for me. So I was able to sort of just like think about their
IBM
strategies.
Really well known for their visual language and the kind of the brand and the guidelines that they've put together around that. That is historically something they're incredible at.
Yeah, no, I got so spoiled when I was there. I mean, we had like a team of like, I mean, we used to go to Austin when I was there, that was their design headquarters. And we used to go in there. It's the most fun office. There's all designers, and yeah, we got so spoiled with our access to resources. What's it called? So yeah, no, I use, I'm forgetting his name. He's extremely famous. This is embarrassing. Extremely famous design, like data viz. Is it like Lotkey or, you know what? I'm forgetting his name. I'm not going to remember it on the fly. But there's like a few like visual design books that this guy's written, and yeah, I always just find that like those guidelines, just like going. So I think one cool thing is about like data viz is like most problems have kind of been solved already. Like there's not like you can kind of like add your own layer, and I think that's the most fun part. But at its baseline, like given a data set, like a type of data set, like let's say geography data, or like in our case, like download per podcast, that's like kind of a solved problem. It's like, okay, like line graph, or like, oh, line graph with the option to do a bar chart. Like geography data. Okay, we want a map with like a heat map of like where those things are. So, and then like, I think making sure that, you're not like, I think the thing that's important to remember, at least for us, especially, not having a design team, is that like, people are there when they're looking at data, just do their job as efficiently as possible. And so making sure that we give them visualizations that are immediately familiar to them is super important, because it just like lowers that cognitive load of needing to like understand what's happening. I mean, you could show a line chart to anybody and they immediately sort of like can read it. So I think just picking that initial like visualization is super important, making sure that it makes sense for the data set you're working with. And then after that, that's kind of, so that's the initial thing. And I think that's the most important thing, because if you pick a pie chart and you should have picked a bar chart or something, like that's gonna, or a line chart, like that's gonna cause problems. But once you pick the right visualization, then I think from there, adding your own like sort of like layering on extra what's called data points that like help the user accomplish the task they've set out to do when they open this app. Like that's where like the real challenge is. But that's like, I'd say 20% of the battle. Like 80% is just making sure that you're picking the right data and you're showing the right visualization.
I'm gonna highlight a couple things in the chat real quick. Yeah. Well, since I'm on the tail end of technical cloud app development training with Microsoft, you transition from the U.S. Active Army service. I've been tuning into this show and I love it. We're glad to have you. Thank you. And
Awesome. Thanks for your service.
And then all that comes down to understanding the requirements of your customer. There are many dependent variables to an end product. Which, like, yeah. That I mean, it's another one of those like figuring out what your user wants, which it sounds obvious, right? You're like, oh, we just build for the things that the user wants, right? But half the time, like, they don't even really know. I love the famous quote about making cars, right? Ford's quote. If we'd asked them what they wanted, they would have said faster horses, right? Like,
no,
which is hokey and everyone's heard it, but also I feel like that is probably one of the most relevant quotes about building software. It's just
absolutely. No, and that's another reason I think designers make some of the best engineers, is because like I think it's so easy to fall into the trap of building exactly what users ask for, when like that's just not like, I'll have like a 30-minute, 45-minute conversation with a user, and I always record them, and I'll look back and I'll say, like 44 minutes of that was just like nothing, and then there was 1 minute where they actually said the problem that they had, and you got to extract that and turn that into a product. Otherwise, you don't end up with anything useful.
I have found that like you said, user interviews tend to be like, there's a huge gap where you're just like begging them to say anything other than it's like this on Amazon. And it's like,
oh my God,
I know.
You're giving me flashbacks.
That's probably my greatest pet peeve. Which is understandable. Like, and again, it's not to like dunk on users. They are reaching for things that they're comfortable with and interfaces that make sense to them. And anytime we're visiting any website, we're working around that just kind of learned behavior, right? And what we expect to happen when we go places based on what other websites are doing and the assumptions that we've learned about navigating the web. But also, we're not all Amazon.
No, that's so funny you say that. I think a lot of like it's not their fault. Like it's not, like it's, I mean, I'm probably the worst. I'd probably be the worst person to do a user interview with, because like I would try to be helpful and I would fail.
I think
like
it's actually harder. I've done one or two now, and it's like, oh, I'm overanalyzing this for sure. I'm not helping you.
No, I always like, no, I mean, I'm lucky going back to like IBM, and like one of the best things that they taught me there was, and working with these really talented designers and like user UX people, was like how to ask the right questions. Like when you're doing a user interview, like not asking like, because I think, and also how to just like explicitly tell people like, I like not explicitly, like, like I don't tell me like what I want to hear. Like, tell me like just tell me about your day. Like literally just tell me that. And they're like, and they always go like, oh, well, like, first thing I do is I open up chartable.com. Like, no, you don't.
No,
let me stop here. It's like,
I don't even do that, and I work here.
No, you don't. So like that's sort of I think like the key for me is just making sure that like getting interviews back on track, asking questions where they'll tell you about the problems that they try to solve day to day, instead of like, how do you use my product? I think that was really valuable, and something that I think a lot of engineers would like really benefit. I think all engineers, like, honestly, I mean, I'm so biased here, but like should shadow like a PM for like 1 or 2 days, just see sort of like what's going on. Cause I think it would really help just get an understanding of like, okay, like here's sort of what our users are thinking. Here's like, develop more empathy towards the users that they're serving.
All right, I'm going to throw Fuel's question in here real quick, mostly because I don't quite know what it's talking about. I wasn't sure if you would either. I'm not familiar with
No,
Spotfire.
no, I've
I
never
don't
heard
know.
of Spotfire actually. Yeah,
Well,
sorry.
unfortunately, we can't tell you, but sound off in the chat if A, you know what Spotfire is and you can tell us, and B, if you know the answer to that question. So
Yeah,
I'll
maybe
see
we
what we
just
can
did
find.
answer that question.
Yeah, maybe the answer is no.
Yeah. Yeah.
We'll figure it out one way or another for you, Feel.
Yeah.
But I actually did want to keep talking about that idea of user testing and speaking with users because I think it's one that's really interesting. Personally, I really love doing user tests, even setting aside the Amazon comparisons. It is something that I find really enjoyable, and I think there's a little bit of an art to running a user interview, but once you get it down, like you said, and kind of learn the right questions to ask and are able to prompt them in ways that get you the information that you want, it can be a really interesting and a really eye-opening experience. And again, I think it's something that's often left to UX engineers or PMs or people that are not engineers. But the flip side of that is that I think it can be hugely beneficial for an engineer to be in that meeting. So I'd be curious if you have any tips, tricks, thoughts on running user testing or just having user conversations for groups that might not have those resources of a UX engineer or a PM or someone who's dedicated to making those user connections and holding those conversations.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I mean, let me start by saying, interrupt me if I say something that's like not actually. I know you're a designer, so and I
That's
know that when I would sometimes run these UX when I was spoiled at IBM. I'd be running these UX conversation. I have like a designer next to me, and you're like, no, ask this instead. So feel free to interrupt me if I say something crazy. Yeah, usually, I think the important thing. I think people underestimate prep is like the
Mhm.
number one thing that I find. When people think like, oh, like this is a user of our product, they love our product or they hate our product, and it'll be great for me to talk to them, we'll just have a great conversation and I'll learn a lot and I can't wait to hear what they say. And if you go into it like that, you're probably not going to have a very useful conversation. You probably will have a great conversation, probably better than if you planned it, but it won't really be useful. So I think the key is planning for what you want to get out of it, having a set of questions that you want to ask that you've like thought of before, and that'll help you in two ways. Number one, it'll help you like sort of standardize the user conversation. So like no matter who you're talking to, you'll sort of be able to have like a real nice set of data, um, a real like unified set of data. The other thing is that if these conversations get off track, which a lot of times they do, because you're just like it's the middle of the workday, you're having a nice conversation, they say something interesting and you just sort of
You
pull
end
on
up
that
shooting the
thread,
shit about whatever for 10 minutes.
whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so just having sort of a list of questions that you can reference really helps things stay on track. And also I think a lot of the best questions asked are not natural questions. Like I think every bone in my body when I'm talking to users, like, so what do you think of this thing that we just launched? And like that is just the wrong question under any circumstance. So making sure that you have these like lists of questions, for example, like I love asking at the end, just like if you had a magic wand
Yep.
that built any product. I mean, there's a classic, magic wand that
Yep.
that like built any product. What would you do? Just asking
Mhm.
that. Like that's not a normal thing to like ask somebody. It doesn't like come up in a normal like nice conversation. So it's good to just sort of have that plan and know what you're going to execute. So um, I think that's the number one thing is making sure that you have a game plan and going in there, knowing that that's what you're going to do. That's the number one thing I change. I think going further into the interview, asking, I think it's called, I mean, I'm trying to think of the exact question, but it's like opening, like you want to sort of like open up or you want to like start broad and then just sort of dig down and make sure that you're
Mhm.
like sort of pulling on threads that are interesting to you. So, you might ask like, instead of asking like, so like when you open, charterbowl.com, like what's the first tab that you go to? It's like, how do you start your day? Like what's the biggest problem that you're trying to solve? When you like, what's the number that you keep going back to that, like what's your KPI? Like I don't like using KPI because sometimes it's like they'll think in their mind like, oh, like my boss says it's this, but they know like no, it's something else. So just asking like what's the most
Yeah.
important number that lets you know that you're doing a good job. kind of questions that, again, they're not like normal human like ways of communicating.
Right.
But that's why you have them written out beforehand so you can sort of ask them, figure out what it is. And then the last thing is, so, opening up like that, making sure that, the questions are not guided. Because what you're really trying to solve for, is like, what is the problem that we can solve for you? Because people pay money like
Yeah.
for things that solve, they don't pay money for like chartable.com. They pay money because like they need to know like if their ads are working. Like that's why they pay for it.
Right.
So making like asking questions about like how, though, that is more important than asking like, oh, like, do you like this button? Like, is this button pleasure? And then just the final thing, just to like at the end of the interview, is to make sure that you've recorded the whole thing. Because if you're asking questions, there's no way that
you're not also taking
paying
notes.
attention. You're not taking notes. You're not paying attention. There's no way. The only time you should be taking notes is if they say something and you want to ask about it later. That's the only time that I would take notes, because otherwise you're going to forget the whole conversation. So I always record it and then I listen back to it. And I hate the sound of my own voice when I listen to it. And so I struggle with it. I really struggle with, this is probably the only VOD that I won't watch. But I really struggle with it. But it's really important, because that's how you actually pull out, like in a 40, like we talked about before, 45-minute conversation, you'll have like 1 minute where they'll say exactly what you need, and you need to be able to extract that. The only way to do that is by sort of listening back. That's like my whole process. I realize, sorry, I went like on and on.
No, that was fantastic, honestly. I think that's what people are looking for. Because again, if you don't have like a UX training background, then a lot of times you are just kind of showing up to those meetings and just going like, well, what do you think? Which doesn't actually get you as far as you might like.
Yeah, it just doesn't.
Yeah. A few folks saying, hey, in the chat, I want to say hello back. Welcome.
Hey.
Welcome. And welcome. Glad y'all are here. Another great comment from Wilson, who's killing it today, straight up. Hit the nail on the head. Identify the initial problem and design a solution based around that. So I come up with all my personal projects. I wish there was an app for this. Oh, wait. I'm a developer. I can build it.
I think it's funny. It sounds obvious, but like it really like it is obvious, but people don't like execute on it. Like they think that to themselves, and people think they're executing, and they're not. And so I think that's really the key, is to just keep reminding yourself.
Yeah. Just make the software more usable. Great. Thank you. Duly noted.
Oh, that's what we're doing wrong.
That's what I was missing.
Of course. So, no, but that's exactly it, though. That is right.
Right. Like that is what they want.
My whole job as a PM was to write that over and over again, pretty much, in different ways.
Try again. This one I think is really interesting. And I'll let you take first swing at it, and then I've also got some thoughts. But Han asks, how would you approach a client with domain knowledge that you have no clue about? Client has no existing system at all. Newbie dev, one-man team, technical, all right, good, know what you're doing, but you don't have the domain knowledge of the client that you're building the software for, which I think is such an interesting problem.
Yeah, that is really interesting. No, I mean that...
I imagine you must have tackled something vaguely similar, unless you were a professional podcaster personally before Chartable.
Well, I was going to say, I think that this is like a very common problem. I think it's rare that somebody like I think like it's rare that a software engineer, it's like software engineering, it's like a hard skill to learn. So like if you're an expert in that, the chances are, opportunity costs you're not an expert in other things.
Great.
And so, like I love podcasts. That's one of the reasons that I joined Chartable. But I'd never made a podcast. I'd never even really thought about the analytics behind them. And so I think it's a very common problem. I know that just to say, I think just like off the bat, like I think most of the time as an engineer, you're not going to be expected. The expectation is not that you're going to like come in there and be like, well, like, as a software engineer, here are my thoughts about e-commerce. In fact, I think that if you said that to the client, they might actually be more angry at you. So
they will fire you.
It's like, okay. So I think the key is to know that it's not your job to be a domain expert. It's the client's job to give you the specs that are required for you to do your job. So like, you know, if the client is at the point where they're hiring a software engineer, now I'll say I was a consultant for a little while, and sometimes this is not the case. The client has no idea what they want, but they should at least be able to outline for you clearly, you know, what the problem is they're trying to solve, why that is a problem. And the expectation, I think, as an engineer is how do you take what the client is telling you and turn that into code and turn that into a product. The expectation is not that you're not going to like come up with a strategy. That's the client's job. So if they're not giving you clear enough specs to execute on their vision, that's their problem, and you should tell them that. Yeah, I think that's what I would do.
I think that's a very fair answer. I'll go ahead and jump in here because I've had a couple of jobs like this, right? And in fact, like you said, I think there's always a little bit of this. Before I was a software engineer, though, I worked in ad agencies, and I always thought that was actually the coolest part of the job, was the opportunity to like dip my toes into 20 million other fields that I never would have like been, not disallowed, but you know what I mean? Like I never would have had the opportunity to learn about. And so, you know, you do a job for a beekeeper society, and all of a sudden you've got all this random knowledge on bees and beekeeping and the little dances they do. And like do one for, we had a client who had these sensors that went on helmets for like football and like hockey that could judge how hard a hit was and whether the person was at risk for concussion, and like got to learn a whole bunch about the history of sports and concussions and brain injuries and how the brain works, and like wild, right? But I guess my thing is try to lean into the fun of that. I always enjoyed that part. Sometimes it's harder. I worked for a year as a software engineer at a cybersecurity company, and I found that one to be difficult.
That sounds tough.
That was a huge world with clients who had very specific needs, and it was very data heavy, and trying to understand enough of the language to make sure that we were giving them what they needed to do their job well was hard. But also a lot of fun. Like, I mean, from a practical standpoint, I guess my advice would be to talk to as many users as you can. I find that that's where the most useful information is, because again, when you're talking to the people who are making the product or the software, they've already decided what they think the solution is, which is fair, and a lot of times they're right, and that's why they're building the software. But when you talk to users, you can get a better feel for the field at large and the kind of scope of what the people want. Sounded very cheesy, but that's my 2 cents on that. But it was, as people noted in the chat, an excellent question, Han.
Yeah, so that's so cool. I'm so jealous of the beekeeper contract.
That one was awesome. So fun. Yeah, it was like a logo for a beekeeping society, and it was just I don't even really like bees. I'll level with you. I find flying insects a little bit scary, but I had a blast learning about like the structure of bee colonies as part of my job, that someone paid me to do. That was insane.
Yeah, I think that's so cool, and that's so true. Like also like it's a real opportunity to like have someone pay you to like learn not just like how to be a better engineer, but also just about like the cool thing that they're interested in.
I think that actually might be the way you said, like the cool thing that they're interested in, because whoever you're talking to that's building software for this is undoubtedly passionate about it if they've made this their job. And to me, there's nothing more fun than to have a conversation with someone who is just so hyped about what they do. Like,
yeah. Oh my God. So I think, just to say, like, also, I didn't know anything really about, like, I was a podcast listener, but I didn't know too much about the business. And one of the most fun things about my job is talking to podcasters who, I'll tell you something, they like, obviously it's their job to talk, but like, man, you can't get these guys off the phone. I don't mind at all. I love talking to them, but I did find that it's funny because I never, like, I remember we get some guys on and they'd be very, very nice. And I'd be like, you run a really big podcast. Like, aren't you busy? They're like, nah, let's just keep chatting. Like, it's fun. I'm like, okay, but I'm busy. How are you not busy? It just is very fun. I mean, they're the nicest people. And they're so good at having a conversation. Like, I look at the clock and like a 30-minute conversation would turn to 2 hours just because like they're so passionate about what they do. And I'm like learning so much from those. Those are some like, that's my favorite part. Probably like when I just joined, just learning more about the space.
That's so fun. Yeah, I'm like way behind on chat because we talked about that. I have
Sorry.
no regrets. Oh, no. That's not a bad thing. Thank you, chat, for keeping it active. The chat has been popping off. Yeah, Thindle saying, and start by talking to them and checking ideas against them. It works for every industry from banking to nuclear. Anyone who gets to do stuff for nuclear, drop in the chat. That sounds cool.
Yeah.
Also, hello. We're glad you're here.
Hi.
Yeah, I like the client explaining what they want. I'll bounce back my understanding of what they want done. They approve it. And then we kind of have some manually run data input and output to test against. Yeah. You get to work in-house. So you get to really dig deep on like that specific thing. That's nice too. I always waffle back and forth. I'm obviously like, I'm in-house now with Kendo, but I've done both where I've been like at ad agencies and had a bunch of clients and gotten to like do a bunch of things at once. And you get to like everything, all the knowledge stays up here. But then when you're in-house, you get to do this like deep dive on whatever the thing is. Yeah. You get to do so many different things, even if it boils down to code in the end. That is the coolest part of our job. Hands down for me. It was the coolest part.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree.
Oh, whew, I laughed at this one. We put it up on screen. It took up like half the screen, but it's a good comment. Start with time constraint. Give a while and reach back to my existing circles. Yeah, that's a good point too. Reach out to your network. See if you know anybody who knows anything about this, and you can like chat to somebody in person. I like that. Very good suggestion. So to deliver in a short time, customer with the knowledge would likely become the rubber ducky as I simultaneously implement concepts as I go, assuming that they know best and they have the knowledge, but they might not have the time to design or implement interstage right B. Yes. There will be no bee dances, Aztec. Don't start. An app that gradually removes my cell coverage. I'm gonna need you to tell me why. Okay. Cool. Need to deep dive on old COBOL stuff, it seems. Oh man. That would be interesting too.
That is really cool.
Oh, cell coverage so you can get people off the phone.
Oh, yeah.
I like that.
Yeah,
so you don't
like,
have to
sorry, I'm going through a tunnel. Yeah.
Right, the like great 90s era, like candy wrapper against the thing. Like,
yeah. Yeah.
Ooh, okay. We went off on a tangent, but I really liked it, so I have no regrets.
Yeah.
But I did want to talk a little bit, or ask you rather, a little bit about the process of going through an acquisition. I think that's something a lot of folks deal with, and a lot of times, sometimes it's really great and exciting, like in your case, where you were a small company that got picked up. And sometimes an acquisition can feel a little bigger and scarier.
Yeah, I think like it really for us it was really exciting. I mean, like Spotify is very cool, like obviously, so just from a cool factor,
that's kind of the dream. Yeah,
it was like, oh cool, like I just get to like join this amazing company. It's like pretty incredible. Oh sorry, I think
I lost you there for a minute.
Hey, can you hear me?
Yeah. Oh, did your AirPods?
Sorry, my headphones died. I was gonna say, yeah. So, no, I mean, it's just like that part alone was like very cool. I'm sure that there's like the initial like, is this going to be a good fit? And for I think for everyone on the team, it was like, this is incredible. I can't speak too much about like what the process was behind the scenes because like as an employee, I didn't really know anything. Like, it was just sort of like one day.
More about oops, sorry. Hold on. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yeah, I'm sorry.
There we go. Nope, that was me. I accidentally bumped the Siri button on my laptop and just dictated to her for a minute.
Nice.
But no, I meant more your experience, obviously, as an employee. Because obviously very cool for those that are at the big tables making the big deals.
Yeah.
But for most of us, we're just going to be engineers.
It's like you're just along for the ride, really.
Right.
And that's one of the things that was really exciting about it too. It's like just sort of like getting that surprise. It's like you get into the room and it's like, got some news, everybody. Like this is happening. It was very cool. The whole team is like super excited about it. So just like that initial thing was really fun. And then in terms of, one of the fun things about like getting acquired by a company like Spotify, beyond just like the cool factor is like I think everybody who like pays attention to podcasts knows that like they've just been investing like crazy in podcasts. And so, it's always sort of been, I think at Chartable, it was always like, we were always worried that, one of these days, like one of these big companies is going to like cut us off. Cause we were basically, we were compiling data from these different sources. So we're always concerned, Spotify, Apple, whoever is going to someday just say like, nope, the faucet shuts off. Like we're not. So it's a real relief. And it means that we can spend resources thinking about thinking about things that will actually help customers and not just sort of keeping the service going. So yeah, it's really cool. Just to sort of be part of, like, have been picked up by a company that's not just like very fun to say, like, yeah, I work for Spotify. But what's it called? But also just having one that like, and it's funny, I say this and it sounds in my head corny, but like actually one that like is invested so heavily in the success of podcasts. I mean, just like looking around at like my business unit, my new business unit, it's like there's so many people and there's so much money, time, engineering effort, just like marketing people who are spending time like making this like business work. It's really cool just sort of like get picked up and be part of that. Like it just means that like we can accelerate at a much faster. We get access to like tons of new data. We get access to tons of new customers. And it's just like as an engineer, it's just like, oh, now I have all these like new toys to play with. It's like now we can think about like these projects that were supposed to be, a year out. Like now they can happen now because like it's easy. And so it's just really, as an engineer going through an acquisition, I'm sure that it varies wildly depending on what happens. But it's just like, it just makes like the scope of what you're able to work on much bigger. It also is definitely very humbling isn't the right word, because I never thought that we were writing like amazing, like I never thought I was writing, but certainly like seeing like some of what these guys are doing, like they're 100% test coverage. I'm like, oh, should probably like install Jest.
There's such a difference, I think, between just the way that startups are working, have to work just to stay alive and to shift things and to get things out there, and the way you can approach problems as a larger company like that. So much of it is in the startup life just very scrappy, it's like you're making things work with the team that you've got and the resources that you've got and the time that you've got. And so stuff like 100% test coverage is gonna slip through the gaps. That's never gonna be the number one priority. But to be able to have that, and that's part of why I wanted you to talk about it, because I feel like a lot of times when we hear acquisition stories, they can be kind of horror stories, right? This feeling of like, they brought us on and then they cut half the team, or like whatever. You can find any number of bad acquisition stories out there, but so many of them go really, really well and work out really, really well and are a benefit to all parties involved.
I think the key is just like figuring out, I don't want to speak for Spotify or the many people who put way more thought into this than I have, but like I think the key is for us just like, like mission, like alignment. Just like, where does Chartable fit into like the Spotify vision? It's sort of like, it was like, you fit in right here. And like, that's, I think the key. It's like, it's not like, oh, like, let's just do it and figure it out later. Or like,
Right.
Not enough planning or something. It's just like, like you fit in this organization. And just like, you guys can just execute, just like go faster. And like, here's more resources to do that. So I think that's, I think the key. And I mean, I think it's rare. It's like rarer than it should be. But like, it's very fun to sort of be like, so far, just like, part of something that like has succeeded and like keep going.
That's great. A couple of things in the chat. Thindal, last time I had an in-house job, I had to explain that we could build an awesome solution where we get a ton of customers, but we were 2 devs. If LinkedIn, who we extended off more platform features, decided that they liked what we'd done too much, they could throw 100 engineers on it and pass this in 6 months. That is kind of the struggle of anything where you are extending features from something else. It's always a little bit of a like risky game to play, but also found a niche, like it's something that's not being offered, and clearly it could work out very well sometimes.
Yeah.
This one cracked me up too. Company wanted to buy out my one-man shop, have me shut down and start working for them.
Yeah.
Give me an offer I couldn't refuse, and they gave me an offer I could refuse.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's always, this is all to put aside. Like, there's acquisitions that go poorly, acquisitions that go well, and then there's like acqui-hires. And like, that's always sort of like, I think a little bit of a dirty secret, I feel like, for a lot of these acquisitions. Like, I mean, you know, like our case, well, that wasn't the case, obviously, because it's but like, yeah, definitely there's times when companies will be like, yeah, we're so excited to acquire this product, and then like 3 weeks later we're shutting it down and the whole team is just like being moved somewhere else.
Yeah.
Some
good conversations still happening around coding and being able to learn things from everyone. So I love code. Although I know just enough to self-correct, my brain gets tickled knowing I can make my imagination reality, and then realize that your reality could be a viable solution for others. My man, you've got to write a book. You've been slamming out some great American novel style comments in this chat, and I love them. Yes, this is actually why I learned to code. Because I wanted to be able, I was doing the imagination part on the design side and then handing it off to somebody else and watching them turn it into something real. And I was deeply jealous. Yeah. So I love that approach to coding. Yeah. And yeah, agreement. Being able to create our dreams and ideas from nothing feels great. Being able to learn about so many different worlds and businesses is very fun. The semantics of code, what brings it to life, it evolves like any other living thing. Y'all are making me y'all got me crying in the club over being an engineer.
Yeah, wow.
This has been such a positive chat. Can't write a book. You can write a book. You can all write books. This is good. But we are just about, I believe, at the end of our time. We normally go about an hour, and we've got obviously some time to spill over because this is a live stream, and we can go however long we want and talk about whatever we want because it's our show, not yours. But I do like to be respectful, especially when we've got guests on. So if anyone's got last minute questions or any other stuff they want to throw out there about Chartable, about being a PM, about running user interviews, I'm trying to remember everything we talked about. Yeah. We were all over the place.
Anything.
Anything that you want to throw out there, now is your chance. This is actually a good one. Listen, who would like to connect with you on LinkedIn? And
go for it.
Probably also in the chat. But if people do want to keep in touch, want to see what you're up to, what you're building, where can they find you, Jake?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mainly, I've been like pretty bad about socials. I went through I'm too addicted to Twitter, so I've tried to stop. I do. You can follow me on Twitter, Jake Shelley. Jake Shelley. I finally got the handle. It used to be like a number at the end. There's an E between the L and the last L and the Y, so SHELLEY. I don't really post that much anymore, but yeah, I mean, like that's mainly where whenever anything does happen, that's kind of where I like to update people. And that's, I mean, if you want to send me a LinkedIn, happy to connect. But yeah, that's pretty much it. I don't really use too many other socials. I'm like a casual TikTok user, but I'm not a poster.
I'm the same way. I'm purely there to lurk and consume content. You will never catch me posting a video.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I'm a pure consumer of my dog videos.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah. Shout out to those of us that have names as Twitter handles. This is an elite crowd, I think.
Wow, that is impressive.
You, me, and Thindle. I went ahead and ruined mine by getting married later and changing my name, but I'm still hanging on to it.
It was you're hanging on to it. Okay, good. I was gonna say you shouldn't give it up.
Oh no, I kept it. I was joking that I actually, when I got married, I added and took my husband's last name at the end of mine, and I didn't hyphenate because that would have been too easy. Retrospectively, I probably should have hyphenated. Trying to explain that you have a last name with a space in the middle was has been a continual challenge.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah, that is tough.
Yes, I'm Grayson space Nans, and that's all my legal last name. At the time, I thought it was like clever and fun, and I would make a joke that was timely then. That was like, yeah, I'm just stacking them up like Hillary Rodham Clinton.
Yeah.
A joke that's not aged well. So, and now I'm just like, no. Yeah, it's especially because Grayson is also a first name. So I'm continually going Grayson Nans, and they're going last name Nans, first name Grayson. I'm like, no.
That's tough. It's too many names.
Yeah. You could have said, nope, take my last name. It's in my Twitter handle. We briefly discussed it, and he has a name that rhymes with Grayson, and we decided that was too cruel.
Oh, God.
It would be like Kate Mate or something. Like I couldn't do it to him. So nope, I'm hanging on. So yeah, you'll find me some places as Kathryn Grayson still, and that's just because I've been sitting on that username since before he was in the picture. God love him.
Never I was like, my Twitter handle.
Yeah. There's some important things in this marriage, and the first one is my Twitter handle.
Yeah, I like the base of like the need pyramid of needs. It's like having
the Maslow's hierarchy
is at the bottom.
Yes, absolutely. First and foremost, gotta hang on to my email address with my name in it. I got domain names, like no one, you can't do that. I wonder. I would be curious to see the data on how often women change their names after marriage now, because I bet it has very little to do with all of the traditional reasons one might choose to take a name, and more with how hard it is to update all your stuff now.
Yeah, no, my wife, we just got married, and my wife was like,
congratulations.
Should I just quit and like start over at a new company? Like, I feel like at this point it's a wash. Like, thank you.
It's insanely hard. It's
I can't imagine.
Ridiculous how hard they make it for something that half of the population will probably do.
Yeah, it feels like it should be easier. But yeah, I don't know. It's just tough.
It took years. So tell her to hang in there.
No.
Oh god. Yeah, some chat in the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which is a thing. I don't know if you were asking about that or if you were prompting us, because we were struggling to come up with that word, but that was the joke. Oh god, ICQ accounts. There's bold of you to assume I put my name on that. But anyway, we'll wrap things up. This has been really good. Thank you guys for hanging out. I really appreciate everyone. Super active in the chat. It was wonderful to hang out with you guys, but we are at just about an hour, so we'll call it here for today. Thank you so much, Jake, for coming on and being a guest.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. It's really fun. I really appreciate it. And thank you, chat. It's really, really nice chatting with everybody. Thank you.
Yep. All right. See you guys later. Have a good week, y'all.
Bye.